good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us today. My name is Sarah Dryden-Peterson, and I'll be the host for today's event. Our session will be in English. Pour accéder à l'interprétation simultanée, cliquez sur l'icône qui ressemble à un globe en bas du page et cliquez sur le français. Unfortunately, we've had a technical issue with closed captions, so that is not working today, and we apologize for that. And we invite you all to join the conversation online on our social media using the hashtags you see in the chat, along with our social media handles that you can see up on the page right now. And please note the session is being recorded and it'll be shared on the WUSC website following the session. You'll not be able to turn on your microphone or videos, but we do encourage you to engage with the conversation in the chat box. And we will have time for some audience questions towards the end of the session. Unfortunately, we won't be able to have everyone asking questions directly, but if you post your questions in the Q&A, I'll be honored to ask the questions on your behalf. And we might not get to all the questions because we do have a short time frame, but we'll try and respond to the major themes and maybe continue responding over social media as we go. And a big thank you to my colleagues, Ornella and Sophie, who are moderating the chat today. All right, although this is an online event, I'd like to start by acknowledging the Indigenous lands that our WUSC office in Ottawa is situated on, the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I'd like to acknowledge the longstanding presence of Indigenous peoples in this territory. I myself am joining from Burkina Faso, and our panelists are joining from a range of locations from Kenya to Canada. I invite you to acknowledge the Indigenous lands that you are joining from in the chat box. We're taking time to acknowledge this, not only because as non-Indigenous Canadians such as myself, we need to integrate this knowledge into our everyday lives, no matter where we sit, but also to highlight that experiences of displacement, which is our topic today, are also something that have happened and continue to happen in Canada. And today we're joined by three fabulous panelists who have graciously agreed to share their experiences with all of us today. We have Sarah Dryden-Peterson, who is the author of the book that this event is centered around, Right Where We Belong, How Refugee Teachers and Students Are Changing the Future of Education. Sarah is an associate professor of education at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard University. She leads a research program that focuses on the connections between education and community development, specifically the role that education plays in building peaceful and participatory societies. Built on decades of experience working in refugee education, her book, Right Where We Belong, is a thoughtful and insightful look at how refugee teachers and students are carving out paths for better schooling and futures in order to be better prepared for and thrive in a diverse and unpredictable world, and showing us that we all have a lot to learn from displaced children and teachers about how to reimagine education. We also have with us today Gorad Muhumed, who's a student at the University of Guelph studying international development and project management. Gorad was born in Eastern Ethiopia, but was forced to flee to Kenya due to political unrest, where he grew up in the Dadaab refugee camp, completing primary school before moving to Nairobi. He continues to be connected to Dadaab, returning as a tutor to help high school students with English and math as he pursues his passion for education. And growing up, he was inspired by other young people in the refugee camp to pursue education opportunities. And in 2018, he was accepted by WUSC's Student Refugee Program to begin his studies at the University of Guelph. Gorad and his colleagues, other WUSC-sponsored scholars from Dadaab, has started the Dollar for Refugee Education Initiative. And it's still in its infant stages, but the team has been able to do mentorship for students, campaign for girl-child education, and purchase some learning materials for some schools in Dadaab. And finally, we have Suleika Abdi Ibrahim with us as well. She's a teacher at Hagadera Secondary School in Dadaab. She was born in Somalia, and she's been living in Dadaab since 2010, where she completed her primary and secondary education. Suleika has been working as a teacher since 2021, teaching chemistry and biology. And as a teacher, she is dedicated to drawing on her own experiences in supporting her students and setting them up for success. She's passionate about supporting and learn more if you haven't already on our website via the link that should be in the chat box. So you can see some more information about our wonderful guests and their accomplishments. So Sarah, Gorad, and Suleika, we're so thrilled to be here with you, and we're really excited to hear about all three of you on how the global development education sector can better learn from the groundbreaking work and experiences being undertaken by refugee teachers and students and learners. So we'll get started into the meat of our discussion. Sarah, one of the predominant themes in your book is about this shift from looking at education for refugees, not only as a holding ground to create a more stable present, but as a means to connect past, present, and future, and ultimately leading to long-term opportunities. There's this question of education for what? So traditionally, education frameworks have focused on access and quality, but your book really highlights the need to also consider the opportunities that education leads to. And for refugees, that can be quite different in different contexts. So we're looking forward to hearing you dig into this a bit for all of our audience here today. Before we do that, we'll get started with exploring this a bit with Gorad and Suleika from their experiences of education in Dadaab. So Suleika, specifically for you, how do you feel that education in Dadaab prepares young people for opportunities in the future? In your experience as a teacher, what are the challenges your students face in using their education for future opportunities?
Thank you, Sarah. Actually, I feel good that refugee education in the Dadaab prepares future opportunities. We have post-schooling opportunities, regardless of the circumstances, challenges like limited access to equitable education, and all other things like rights to work, rights to have education, or right to have a permanent residence. Uh, Students get prepared to pursue high education in the Dadaab. These students, each year, the number of students increase, but the opportunities are limited. We have limited opportunities. So we see that our students are suffering due to lack or due to scarcity of those opportunities will prepare them will prepare their life in future. So this is something also we consider in our teaching. In our school, as a teacher, what we normally do, like we do career talk, whereby we advise our students to develop their careers so that they can pursue higher education and also they can get such kind of opportunities. So up to now, we have only 2 programs that enable the students to pursue higher education. We have a add-on of SRB program, student refugee program from WUSC and also DAFI. So when we compare the number of students, the number of graduates from secondary school, and the opportunities we have, the opportunities are less. So we see sometimes our students, regardless of the interest they have in their academics, they also lose confidence in such a way that how long as they learn and get access to learning, they are hopeless due to limited opportunities to hire their or to pursue higher education. So we have a live example. Someone like me, I finished my secondary school 2 years back, but still I'm one of the victims that are waiting to get an opportunity to pursue their education. So that one is a problem to the Dadaab students. Yeah. So what we do is just encouraging our students to prepare for the future. Like we we act as a role model, and during class sessions we just give them the hope and tell them that how long we tell them to prepare for the future. We tell them that to excel high education and also the language skills. So actually, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Suleika, for those thoughts. I think it's really interesting that the opportunities might be there, but they're limited, and the impact that then has on the students and their motivation or their sense of confidence in themselves. That seems like a very important point. Gorad, over to you. You also attended primary school in Dadaab. Is there anything from your experience that you would have wanted to be different in this preparation for opportunities for the future? And in your experience, what is the future that we're preparing young refugees students for in Dadaab and in other contexts?
Thanks so much, Sarah, and I'm very glad to meet everyone. Thank you for running the event, and I appreciate our participants to join us from different parts of the world. Thank you, Sarah Peterson, for this wonderful book. To the question, I attended the primary school in Dadaab. First of all, I would introduce myself again. My name is Gorad Muhumed, and I come from the Dadaab refugee camp, and I'm still connected to Dadaab. Some of the problems or the challenges we as students faced in the past, and the students at the moment face in Dadaab, is that the resources as Suleika has mentioned is very limited. And what are these resources? We are talking about teaching quality. There are students, we did not have quality teachers. We do not have enough classrooms. We do not have enough funding for these projects. And this situation still holds as we speak. Those students do not have these resources. And it is these resources that fuel education, the quality of the education. Other challenges that students faced in the past and still exist is the issue of repatriation. Repatriation is just to explain the word, is when a refugee is asked to go back to their country, even though that might or may not be possible. So students do face that, uncertainty, if you like, that they cannot go back to the country, like for example, Somalia. Students are not able to go back. And if they go back, they lose a lot of the opportunity they have at the moment, which is educational, like solely education, because it's the only option, it's the only dream-based opportunities they have at the moment. So repatriation is another big concern. The third challenge, as Suleika has mentioned, is the post-secondary education that is also limited. And that also demoralizes our students who worked hard from primary to secondary, and now they cannot complete their education cycle. That poses a challenge for the students to lose hope, to lose confidence, and to not realize their actual potential. Other than that, education, even though I'm extending a little bit to the question. Our students also face two other challenges. One, they are not able to integrate into the hosting country. For example, a student in the refugee camp is not allowed to go and work in Nairobi, to go and work in Kisumu, to go and work in Garissa, because of the policies in place that restricted their movement. That means that if the student does not find an opportunity, employment opportunity, learning opportunity, other social opportunities, if they cannot find these opportunities in Dadaab, then they cannot find nowhere else because they are not allowed to go there. That's one. The other challenge they have is that for those who finished high school and think that they at least have high school diploma and they could go back and work maybe in their country, they don't have peace in their country. That means their access to further opportunities is also limited in Dadaab from this perspective. And these two challenges limit the doors education would otherwise open for these candidates, for these future candidates. And I think in terms of the challenge, that is actually crippling what difference education could make, not only for the candidates, but for the wider community who inhabit the Dadaab refugee camp. Because when a mother, for example, a single mother or a family of 5 have only one graduate and they cannot make ends meet, they cannot get jobs, they cannot find opportunities, even though they have graduated from high school, and they cannot get a scholarship to go outside this camp or even in the camp. I mean, the rest of the children or the rest of the family members lose hope. They are in despair because that was the only light in the tunnel, and it's now dimmed, like it's now disappearing. So these are the challenges, and what I would say would make a difference in the camps for education, for the community, and for the students is that I wish there could be more funds allocated for education sector to expand those classrooms, to provide more learning materials, to encourage girl-child education, to do campaigns for girl-child education, to engage with the community, and penetrate this system deeply enough to ensure that any youth member is catered for, no matter of what needs they have. They may have a disability or they may not have, but just going deep there, I think is what needs to have done. And on the other perspective, I wish there will be more coordination between the international NGOs, international humanitarian NGOs, and the hosting government in terms of coordinating towards what is best for the refugee students. And that includes the hosting government being, more going forward. So the efforts that either encourage students to integrate into the system. Like, for example, if I compare what's happening in Dadaab to what's happening in the refugee camps in Uganda. In Uganda, students are allowed to go to Kampala, move around the country. They have their IDs, refugee ID cards, and they can be any part of the country as long as they are good citizens and they're good people and they're not, causing any problems. That is not the case for Dadaab. Dadaab is they are in confined space, and they can only be in that space. That is a big issue. But that is more for the government to change. It's not the refugee to change or the NGOs to change. So these are the parts of the challenge. And Sarah, if you would like me to continue with the innovations, and I would continue, but I think that's the first part of the question I would answer.
That's perfect. Thank you. I think we'll come back and have a chance to talk a little bit more as we go through some of the other questions. Thank you so much for that, Gorad. I think, Sarah, a lot of what Suleika and Gorad have shared ties in really nicely to some of the findings in your book and these different contexts and how different the situation is in different places. I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit your reflections on these questions and what you found through your research in different contexts.
Sure. Thanks so much, Sarah, and thank you, Suleika and Gorad. It's really just wonderful to be in this conversation with all of you today, and thank you to those who are joining from so many places. I thought I'd focus in on these kind of both the limitations on resources and on opportunities that I hear Suleika and Gorad, both of you, talking about. And I was going to start just by reading a few sentences from the beginning of the book where I try to talk about this word refugee and what refugee really means as a way, a kind of lens into these resources and opportunities. So it says, some of the people you will get to know in this book embrace the word refugee, and some reject it. As with all labels, embracing or rejecting depends on how the term is used. In particular, how it is used, how it is co-opted to disempower and to exclude. I use the word refugee to embrace the ideas of seeking refuge, of locating sanctuary, and of creating possibilities of belonging. And these three things, seeking refuge, locating sanctuary, and creating possibilities of belonging, is what I hear echo across the descriptions that you have given, Suleika and Gorad, and the aspirations that you talk about. In the book, I look at research that we've done in 23 countries. Some of the countries I know that people are joining from today. It includes research from Chakatu refugee settlement. I see we have someone joining from there, from Dadaab, from Nairobi, from Canada, from South Africa, from Uganda. I know there are people from all of these places listening into this conversation. And what I think we see across these different spaces is some patterns that are different, Gorad, as you pointed out, in terms of legal status and freedom of movement, and also some patterns that are quite similar in terms of these resources and opportunities. I think across all settings, we see a real limitation on resources, Suleika, as you've described, that are available, the quality of education, the access to classes, and then also limitations on the kinds of opportunities that might follow from that education that are often based on individuals or groups' identities, on legal status, on discrimination. And so some of the exciting ideas, I think, Sarah, as you were asking about, is that really what teachers are doing is trying to create something that's not just more of the same. And of course, that depends on access to more resources. But I think what we see is that it also really depends on doing things differently. And that's why in this book, I really focus in on teachers and students. On this World Teacher Day, I think this conversation about teachers can also be so important because all of us have teachers, whether that be in school or in other parts of our lives. I think that what we see, each of us, no matter what our educational backgrounds, is that those qualities of teachers who are trying to do things differently to create both the education in the moment and the kinds of opportunities that young people are seeking. Four things really stood out just very briefly. I think one is teachers who really try to support students to imagine the future, not just what's going on in this present moment, which requires a kind of learning that links people's past experiences with what they are experiencing in this moment, but always keeps that future aspiration in mind, not as if it's some kind of a dead end, even when there are limitations on rights. The second thing is really focusing in on some of these transnational kinds of opportunities and innovations. I think, Gorad, as you've described also this kind of, what does it mean? And this is in the chat in several different places, to support young people, to support teachers who want to work across borders that are set up, that are physical, but really get into those kind of lack of cognitive borders, of being able to work with students who live in a different country, of being able to move across borders and provide support as teachers, as former WUSC students, and whatever our different kinds of capacities are. The third, I think, is really around curriculum. And often this has to do with history and language that can support young people to really think about their own history, a history that they care about, to think about the kinds of languages that can support them in the future. And this is obviously so central, the coordination piece that you talked about, Gorad, in thinking about ways to not be defined by what a national curriculum and borders are, but to really think about the individual student and the kind of mobility that they seek. And then fourth, I think that links all these things together are the kinds of pedagogies that teachers use, really focused on relationships, on getting to know students, as Suleika and Gorad, both of you have talked about. What are individual students' needs? What are their aspirations? And what are the ways in which education can really help students, not just to see what barriers are there, but actually create the kinds of tools and the kind of learning that can support them to address those barriers, not only for themselves, but also for the community. I'm looking forward to the next questions where we can dig into some of these things.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. I think it, yeah, it really ties in the different experiences that that Suleika and Gorad shared, and that are reflected as well in other contexts that you've explored. I think beyond the individual level of education as a path for opportunities, your book also explores, and I think you just spoke about this a little bit as well, the collective value of education. So education contributing to peaceful, welcoming, holistic societies. And I'm wondering if we can explore this idea a little bit about what policymakers, activists, and educators have to learn or can learn from the experiences of displaced children and teachers about what works and what needs to be done differently in looking at education as a tool for creating stronger societies. And I think maybe this time, Gorad, we'll start with you on some of your thoughts around this of education as a tool for creating stronger societies.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That's a great question, and I believe, as WUSC said sometime on the mission, they say education transforms lives, and that is true. For me, education is one of the greatest tools that can not only develop a society, but also unite a society, because it is through education that knowledge is shared. And when knowledge is shared, everybody in the society gets that knowledge, and they have a perspective, a common view, a common dream towards what is good, what's a common good for the future. And I believe that starts with providing a platform that is accommodative, a platform that is inclusive, a platform that does not take sections out of the mainstream, but one that despite whether you have a refugee name or asylum seeker or an immigrant or black or white or brown or Muslim or Christian or atheist, a platform that provides access to education is where it all starts for this unity to happen. The other thing that I think is important is understanding what component of knowledge is missing in a society. Where do we need education? What sector? Is it technology? Is it social science? Is it sexual orientation? Is it youth? Is it where and which demographic of the society do we focus more to make sure that or to leverage the opportunity of spreading the knowledge to the society? And I think youth, in this perspective, and especially for those who do not have the platform now, are the refugees. So fixing the problem of the refugee youth fixes the global issue for the youth. Like that's logical in my opinion, and I believe as I may have mentioned this in the past, but the youth in the refugee camps, which predominantly come from Somalia, they are at risk of being radicalized by extremist militias, Al-Shabaab, ISIS, and they are a very good resource for them if the world does not engage them and give them the right trajectory, the right direction to channel their energy. Because energy can be very destructive unless it's used wisely. The third component that I would say education is building the society is that in terms of teaching, in terms of providing that knowledge, I think it's very important to learn the environment and contextualize the way that knowledge is transferred from the experts to the illiterate, so that they will be everybody will come in the middle of the road. And that can happen sometimes, for example, empowering people who have the refugee experience to give them the resources they need to penetrate and reach the grassroots level society. And what I mean to come a village is to understand the cultural perspective of that community, that particular community, about education. How do they see education? What is their worldview? How do they treat education? When I say I'm a professor, what is their common understanding of that word in the community? I think that is what, for me, it means to have education transforming the way societies live. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those reflections, Gorad. I think we'll come back to this issue of a platform and raising the voices of refugees and people with this lived experience, and the importance of that. So we will come back to that point. Suleika, over to you now to reflect on this thought of education as a tool for creating stronger societies, and from your experience of where you sit as a teacher and being in Dadaab, do you have any reflections around this?
First, I think I forgot to let me take this opportunity to welcome the audience. My name is Suleika Ibrahim. I'm from the Dadaab Refugee Camp. So to come to the question, to start with the question, what can policymakers learn from displaced children and teachers? As we know, the Dadaab communities, they have difference when it comes to religion, belief, and also perception towards education. So what we can learn from displaced children, like we want to have, and we want to have like. Let me take the issue of perception towards education. So the Dadaab, we have a Somali community, and majority of the people in the Dadaab are Muslims. So there's a kind of, they have a low perception towards education, especially girl child education. So they believe girls are supposed to child children and also twenties, like the population of the community. So what we like the policymakers learn from displaced children is like to set some programs that enable also girl child education. Uh, Also, the policymakers will learn to consider the environmental conditions. Here in Dadaab, the climate is very hot and we experience harsh climatic conditions. So, when setting up the curriculum activities, also they should put consideration on the environmental conditions so that the students can access the education. So also they should consider the issue of the displacement. In here, Dadaab, we have long-term displacement whereby we have communities which are here almost 30 years. So at the very moment of arrival in Dadaab, comes they encounter challenges like language barrier. So and as the policy has set aside, we have a language, Swahili language. So that one is a common problem to the students in the DAP. So I would like the policymakers to learn all those issues from displaced children so that the kind of education they are getting is also varying when it comes to level of consumption. And also, let me go for the point of what can educators learn from displaced children and teachers. We have the issue of level of consumption. Like at the very moment of arrival in the DAP, we have those people, the age gap is different. We have students which start which join school at the age of 10, 12, 13, somewhere. So also the system of education, all the curriculum should favor the level of consumption, and also they look for the target groups like something like the age gap and all those things. So let me come for the question: what can be done differently? What can be done differently? So I will ask the policy makers, all the educators to do a kind of inclusion for refugee teachers and also experienced people. So here we have teachers, also we have experienced people from Somalia. So most of our parents, they have taken their education in Somalia. So when they come to refugee, the refugee camp, is a kind of like they come to a place where they are nothing, where they are nobody. They have the experience. We have some parents who can be pilots, who can do any professional work. But here in the DAB, they are nobody because they are not have the right to work. And when it comes to teachers, most of the time, what we do is we are just volunteers. We volunteer ourselves to give our resources back to our colleagues, the next generation. So the last thing I would educators should also look at the teaching methodology, like teaching strategic level of like a way that the students can consume the the need whatsoever the teachers are trying to trying to say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Suleika, for those additions. I think this issue of contextualizing education resources to the context. Gorad also spoke about this and inclusion and how do we make sure that we're including everybody I think there were some really, really strong recommendations for policymakers there as well. I'm looking at the time, but we still have lots to talk about, so let's keep going. Sarah, do you have any reflections on what Suleika and Gorad have shared, and drawing a bit from your book as well?
Sure. Thanks so much to everyone here. One of the things that that I try to do in the book is look at some of the history of the way that I actually think policymakers have learned from educators and students. And one of the ways that I've seen this is that really until about 10 years ago in global policy, we saw that refugee education was considered very temporary as a kind of only an emergency measure, just meant to provide kind of a space for children to be that could be secure for that moment, but not really thinking about the future. And I think what we've seen in an incomplete way, but still in an important way, is a kind of move by policymakers at national and at global levels to really move from seeing refugee education as a kind of holding ground to something that does consider the future. And I really think that this learning was a way of following the lead of teachers and students in places like Dadaab, teachers and students who resisted the approaches that really didn't reflect their realities or their purposes for education. This is a quote from an NGO staff member who was educated in Kenya, a refugee himself in Kakuma camp, not in Dadaab, but I think reflects perhaps a similar experience. This staff member said, pointing to generations of young people who had been born in Kakuma, and explained that their experiences were misaligned with these emergency practices of refugee assistance. So saying, if I was born here and I grew up here, why are you telling me this is an emergency? This is my life. This is the education of children. And I think that what we saw then was teachers in Kakuma, teachers in Dadaab beginning to teach the Kenyan curriculum, beginning to use English as well as other languages, and to advocate for students to be able to be eligible to take Kenyan national exams. And from that example, again, it's not perfect because taking the Kenyan exams doesn't guarantee the right to freedom of movement, the right to work, the right to further education, as Suleika and Gorad, you've pointed out so clearly, but provides a possibility, the beginnings of an opportunity that has been really a model for many other countries in thinking about what that would look like. At the same time, I think that there remain many challenges of ways that policymakers in particular can learn from the work of teachers and students. I've seen this as a theme through the chat of this idea of quality education. In so many places where refugees access school, even when they're accessing national schools and already existing systems, those are schools that are already failing national children. The quality of education is incredibly low. Some research that we've done in Kakuma shows refugee learning outcomes, early grade learning outcomes, to be among the lowest recorded anywhere in the world. And we simply have to address this. Policymakers at all levels need to step up to really address this absence of possibilities for even basic kind of learning. The second is really about this idea of contributing. So the basic education is one thing, but any conversation with teachers and students in a refugee setting will show all of us that the desire is not just to be able to learn the basics, but to really be able to learn in ways, Suleika, as you've described, that can involve a contribution to the individual and to the community. One of the exciting, I think, innovations that I talk a lot about in my book is those who are members of a refugee diaspora and who re-engage in settings from which they were displaced, often after they've had a chance, like WUSC students, to pursue education elsewhere, are able and are much more critical of the status quo of education in those sites of conflict or refugee education based on their own experiences, and really adopt a much more liberation approach to that kind of education that is very political and that tries to engage with the kinds of inequalities and discrimination that are experienced in schools and related to migration policies that are often what policymakers shy away from. I think often we hear this critique that, well, okay, so refugee teachers who are refugees themselves can do this. But what about all the teachers who are nationals, who are longtime residents of Lebanon or Jordan or Kenya? How do we make sure that they also have these inclinations and capacities to teach with this liberation in mind? And I think some of our new work that's really exciting to me is a study that we've been doing in Jordan, where we hear teachers, Jordanian teachers, really talk about doing this learning from their students, that they, in conversations, in listening, in observing experiences, are able to both see and act on the kinds of adaptations, Suleika, that you were talking about, of do we need to end school earlier in the night before it's dark so that parents will continue to allow their girl children to go to school? Do we need to actually teach in multiple languages, even though that's not allowed by the national curriculum? Because if we don't, then students simply don't understand. Yes, we need to cover a certain curriculum so students can take exams. But on the other hand, if this curriculum is not relevant to students, how do we push it beyond that so that we can do both and? And so I think by learning from these examples of refugees and nationals who are teachers really thinking about what their students need, that we may be able to really push forward the kind of quality education that allows students to contribute in the future.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think what comes very clearly out of a lot of these discussions is this need to listen to the voices and the experiences of what's actually of what's going on. And I know we do want to have time for a couple of questions, but there is just one last question which I think would be interesting to just take a couple minutes to talk about. This idea of, or this the importance of elevating voices and practices of refugee-led initiatives. And Sarah, you document a lot of rich stories in your book. But in the face of those with power, those making decisions, sometimes the voices behind those stories are drowned out. And so how can NGOs and government actors best use their platforms to amplify voices of those with lived experiences, so the refugees can actually be part of the decision-making processes around some of these things that we've talked about? And I think, Gorad, you mentioned this already. So maybe we'll start with you, Gorad, to reflect on this a bit, and then just in a few words, so we have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And I like I said, I believe empowering people who have experience in this area would fix one of the problems. And that starts with, I believe, in our case, if I take, for example, the DRE program that we run is technology would help, because if we put a lot of resources for education online and students can get some data to access that information, that would help a lot. Otherwise, sometimes the teachers on the ground may not have enough curriculum-based books to teach their students. But putting those information online, maybe creating a website by people who understand the culture and the system, would save a lot for the students and for the implementers to maximize the benefit of the scarce resources that are always there for education. And I believe sustainability is what holds. Like Sarah has mentioned, Sarah Peterson. Education refugee was kind of temporary scale, and I think it's changing the direction. The pivot is changing. So dealing with it as such, it will need a kind of re-engineering of how we see education for refugees, and that starts the issue of understanding the sustainability, need for sustainability in schools in the refugee camps, both the secondary education and skills that students need when refugees finish schools, high schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Gorad. Suleika, would you like to add any thoughts to this question of how NGOs and government actors can use their platforms to elevate the voices of those with lived experiences?
Thank you, Sarah. I would like to add, the policy, the NGOs, also the government activists, to use people on ground, to use the voices of people on ground. Here, what I mean, like the media itself should come where the victims are. Like, example, if it is the Dadaab refugee camp or Uganda refugee camp, they should go there by themselves so that the connection will not be lost. Like, they can use the voices of displaced children and those with lived experience directly instead of sending other representatives to take the voice. And what happens in the process, the connection is lost, like the voice will not be taken the way it is. So I would like the NGOs and government activists to officially come somewhere like the Dadaab refugee camp, and then we should have a face communication with those with lived experience. Yeah, like you say.
Thank you so much. Sarah, in a minute.
Great. You know, this was a question I thought a lot about in writing this book because I document a lot of stories that are not my stories. And really a teacher, I think in South Africa, in a conversation that I had with her, made me feel like actually it was the right decision to try to share more broadly stories that were not my own. I was sitting in her classroom and she said, well, what did you think about the lesson? And I said, well, actually, I'm not like, I want to know what you think about the lesson. And she said, you know, that feels like a kind of power that you're exerting over me. You have this knowledge, you've been in these other classrooms that are in just the town over from where we are, classrooms in other countries. And I want to know what's going on in those classrooms so I can think about how that influences my own teaching and what I might learn from that. And I think in that moment, it really became clear to me that for any of us on this call who have this kind of privilege to learn from other people, to learn from other experiences, that bringing those into a conversation where we can learn across these borders that sometimes feel so closed is really not only an opportunity, but I think a responsibility. And that goes for those of us who are researchers, those of us who are educators, those of us who are policymakers. And I think many more of those conversations can hopefully lead us into some more of the kinds of opportunities and solutions that each of us are talking about.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I'm just taking in everything that's been said, and I feel like there's a lot of processing that for a lot of us that are listening in today. I think there's been a lot of really rich discussion, and it's been very inspiring to hear sort of how, like from Gorad and Suleika, the experiences they have, and kind of the challenges as well to those of us who work in the sector of how we can do things differently. We have a few minutes left. There are quite a lot of questions in the Q&A. We're obviously not going to get to all of them, but as mentioned earlier, we will try and we'll collect all of the questions and see if we can send some answers out over social media in the coming days. I would like us to maybe have a look at the questions and just quickly go over one or two before we wrap up, realizing that some people are going to have to jump off right at our end time, but those who are able to stay on are welcome to do that. Maybe just for those who do have to jump off, I will just say before that Sarah's book is available. We are going to put in the chat a link to a a bookseller to where you can find a local independent bookstore who's selling the book, but it's also available online for those who are interested. And we do have an Instagram contest that's going on for anyone who would like to win the book. You can find us at WUSC_EUMC. So that's just an important information before we continue on some questions. Looking at the questions that have come in here, we did have this upvoting system, so maybe that'll help us decide which ones to go with. I see one here that has 6 votes, and it's a bit on the theme of what we've just been discussing. So Anna Morgan Woltz wrote, Gorad mentioned a wish or priority on coordination between NGOs and governments. I wondered whether you might talk about coordination between multiple NGOs and governments, what kinds of cooperation exist and have been successful, or which NGOs are most influential in East Africa and how might they combine their efforts? So I think the question is open. Maybe Sarah, from the research you've done, and then if you have any thoughts on that, and then Gorad and Suleika could weigh in as well.
Sure. I think just quickly from our research, one of the most important things that we see in coordination is really trying to think about the connections across different spheres of influence. And so in really focusing in on, and maybe Suleika and Gorad, you can come in on this, of kind of particular NGOs that are doing phenomenal work in local places, but really thinking about what's going on. What are teachers and students creating? As we've seen over time, teachers and students often create education that looks very different from what might be advocated at a global level. So how do we understand that disconnect across the levels? And then what do we do about it? And then really thinking about the interaction of those local NGOs with national institutions who they depend on for funding, and also with global institutions who may also dictate different kinds of funding cycles or be more active in advocating for different kinds of policies related to migration that are so essential. And so I think this idea of really thinking about it as an ecosystem and the action needing to be directed across is a big theme that we uncover in the work across countries.
Suleika, would you like to say a few words about that question? We can also pick a different question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the coordination between organizations, NGOs, are very, very important for education for refugees, especially in the Dadaab and Kankoma and other refugee camps I know so far. We normally have UNHCR as a mother organization which deals with education for refugees. And there's this, especially UNHCR organizations that partner with UNHCR on education scale. And I think not only that, but also the philanthropists from the world and the NGOs in international development. It's important if they coordinate with UNHCR on education for refugees, and not only that, but also the local refugee camps. I mean, local NGOs within the hosting countries can also play a role, because working with UNHCR on education for refugees will mean that pulling all these resources together for the greater good of the students. I think that would make a big difference.
Thank you. Suleika, do you want to say a couple of words about this question?
Sarah said, whatever they said is what I can say.
Okay, that's fine. That's perfect. There is one more question with 6 votes, so I do think we could just take that question quickly. I recognizing that we're 2 minutes over now, but in the spirit of fairness, there was one more question that had 6 votes, and it was from Muhumed Abdi, and the question is for Sarah. But I would also love to hear what Gorad and Suleika have to think about this. But what do you think about teachers like Suleika teaching a fellow refugee student is different from non-refugee teachers, and how will that empower students?
This is such a great question. And I think just two things briefly. I think there's research all over the world that shows that these connections between teachers and students on lots of different factors, but often on identity, be that race, language, religion, is so important because it can deepen the relationship that students and teachers have and then deepen the learning. I think one of the things that is also so important about this kind of question, and I see it echoed through some of the other questions, is that in any situation, education for refugees is almost never separate from education within a whole community. And I think sometimes we do a real disservice in focusing only on one population. And so I think that when we're thinking about refugee teachers, we also need to think about refugee teachers teaching national students and creating these kinds of bridges across experiences, and national teachers teaching refugee students, and how we support teachers to really think about working with students to understand the kind of new community that they're creating that spans across these different identities and borders.
Thank you. I wonder if Suleika or Gorad would like to jump in on this one.
Yeah, Sarah, absolutely. To just save time, I would say I would agree with Sarah Peterson on this. Suleika as a teacher will be treated by the community as one of their own. And that means everything for the students in terms of their confidence to share some personal information, in terms of taking home the message they get from her. And I think that also it's an experience I had when I went to the refugee camp in 2021. The attention, the presence, the confidence, the ability to communicate was very clear to me when I was talking to students, because they treat me as one of them, right? In terms of the race, as Sarah Peterson said, the religion, or the environment in which I was raised, all this play very important role when it comes to the teacher-student connection and how students perceive the message, educational message from the teacher. And I think that's what I mean when I say collaborating in the environment, is what makes a big difference for the students' refugee education.
Thank you so much, Gorad. Suleika, from your experience, yeah.
Supplement on what Sarah and Gorad has said, the difference between refugee teachers and refugee teachers like me, there is that kind of confidence refugee students have on refugee teachers. Like we are in a position that we understand what they are doing, what they have went through, because we also we were also a victim. Like, you know, the language barrier when it comes to issues, like they can share with us without any hesitation, and also we can quite help them with academics. Like sometimes national teachers, they are not accessed at night, but as refugee teachers, we are on the same place, same ground, so they can be accessed. They can come and consult anytime, really. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. There are a few other questions. I think we'll keep them, and we'll try and see how we can answer some of them in the days to come through our social media. As I don't want us to take too much more time. We've already gone a bit over. So I think at this point, I just want to say a very big thank you to Suleika, Gorad, and Sarah for participating in this panel today and sharing all your wonderful thoughts on the different topics we covered. It's been really a really rich discussion, and we're looking forward to continuing the discussion in the days and weeks to come. And I think maybe we could just put up the information about where to access the book again for those who are still around. Perfect. Oh, that's our thank you page. Yeah, I think, yeah, it's available online and through local independent bookstores as well. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Gorad. Thank you, Suleika. It's been so nice to spend this time with you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.